You are welcome to GMAETS 41's biology class. In our previous class, we treated the concept of classifications of living things when we introduced biology on this channel. In that class, we explained that living things are broadly classified into plants and animals. And these two, we refer to them as organisms because living things are also called organisms. In this class today, we are going to give attention to the differences between these living things, these organisms, plants and animals. An examiner can ask you that question in exam. You can be given the question to differentiate between plants and animals, perhaps maybe giving up to like 5 differences between these two organisms. That is what this class is focused on. All right, so we are going to move on straight to these differences, okay? The first difference between plant and animal we are going to consider will be with respect to their mode of nutrition, okay? So, animals exhibit heterotrophic mode of nutrition, while plants exhibit autotrophic mode of nutrition. We'll talk about heterotrophic mode of nutrition. It means that the organisms cannot produce their own food. Rather, they depend on other organisms for their food. So animals, they are heterotrophic, while plants are autotrophic. By autotrophic, we mean that they can manufacture their own food. Is that okay? Good. So plants are autotrophic organisms, while animals are heterotrophic. The second difference we are going to look at is in terms of movement. Animals move from one place to another place. So movement in animal is total, where the whole body is moved from one place to another place. Plants, on the other hand, do not move from one place to another. Plant is fixed, so their movement is just by the waving of the leaves, the branches, and maybe when the stem also moves. When we have something like breeze blows, right? If breeze blows, you usually see the parts of plants, okay, moving. So the movement in plants is partial. It's not total as in the case of animals. This will take us to the next differences between these two organisms, plants and animals. Right? Good. We are going to look at the presence of chlorophyll or chloroplast. Animals do not possess chlorophyll or chloroplast. Plants possess chlorophyll or chloroplast. The reason for this is because animals do not produce their own food. Rather, they are dependent on plants or other animals, right? Generally. And so that is why we say that animals are heterotrophic. Okay? Chlorophyll or chloroplast is responsible. In fact, that's the part of leaf where photosynthesis takes place, so that the organism can be able to produce its own food. So if animals are dependent in terms of nutrition, they are heterotrophic. It means they do not contain chloroplast. They do not contain chlorophyll. But plants, on the other hand, contains or possesses chlorophyll or chloroplast. So you can say in animals, chloroplast or chlorophyll is absent. But in plants, chlorophyll or chloroplast is present. The next difference between plant and animal we are going to look at, or between animals and plants we are going to talk about, is the form in which these organisms store carbohydrates. Animals store carbohydrates as glycogen. Animals store carbohydrate as what? Glycogen. What about plants? Plants store carbohydrate as starch. Plants store carbohydrate as what? starch, while of course animals store as glycogen. You want to take note of that, very important. Another difference between animals and plants is in terms of one part of cell called the vacuole, right? The vacuole. Animals do not have large vacuoles. Animals do not have large vacuoles. Plants, on the other hand, have large vacuoles. vacuoles. Let's talk about another difference between animals and plants. Can we look at sense organs? Animals have sense organs, but plants do not have sense organs. Is that okay? Let's talk about excretory organs, okay? And respiratory organs also. We can use that to give another difference between animals and plants. Animals possess special excretory and respiratory organs. What about plants? Do they have special excretory organs? No. Do they have special respiratory organs? No. I hope you're following, right? Now I want to talk about one part of a cell called the cell wall. We can use that also to differentiate between animals and plants. Animals do not have cell wall. They do not have cell wall. What about plants? Plants possess cell wall. That is why you could always hear something like cellulose cell wall. Cellulose cell wall. When you hear about that, it generally applies to plants. That is another difference between animals and plants as the two classifications of living things. The next difference between animals and plants is in terms of growth. In terms of what? Growth. The growth in animals is limited. Growth in animals is what? Limited. What about growth in plants? It's unlimited. It's unlimited. A plant can grow as, much as possible. And I'll tell you the reason for that. You know that often it can cut the branch of a tree, for example, the branch of a plant, for example. What usually will happen? Over time, the branch will develop. You can cut the leaf of a plant. What happens? Over time, that leaf will develop. You can even cut down the stem of a plant. Sometimes what happens over time? You can see, as long as the root is still there, you can see the plant developing more. Are you following, right? So, the plant, the growth in animals is limited, but in plants, it is not limited. Okay? It is infinite. If you talk about animals, for example, growth is limited, like I said. So there's a certain level an animal may grow up to, and it becomes a disease. And it could even lead to the person's death. At least I've watched cases where you have somebody who keeps growing. Like if you talk about the tallest man in the world, check. There are certain, genetic disorder. Maybe you talk about increasing in size, like someone being fat, right? There is an extent as the person continues to increase in size, in width, it becomes abnormal. Some people even die from it. They die from it. So that is an abnormal form of growth, telling us that growth in animals is limited, but in plants, it is not limited. Okay? And then when you come to the parts of animals that grow, generally, all parts of an animal grow, right? But for plants growth is usually terminal. and apical. At the terminal point, you see them, they'll start growing, okay? So you take note of that. Finally, let us talk about the way animals respond to stimuli. When you talk about irritability, in our previous class, we talked about that characteristics of living things, which we refer to as irritability. So how do animals respond to stimuli? And how do plants respond to stimuli? Animals respond to stimuli fast, okay? So the response to stimuli in animal is fast, but the response to stimuli in plant is very slow. That is why you now as a person, if you hold a hot object, what do? Immediately you withdraw your hand. But imagine that you bring a hot object close to a plant. Will the plant run away? No, still remain there. Okay? Yeah. So response to stimuli in animals is fast, while response to stimuli in plants is what? Slow. These are some differences between these two classifications of living things, animals and plants. And I hope you've learned something very well. In exam, an examiner could just ask you, state so-so number. Could be 5 differences between plants and animals. And of course, you can pick from this list that I've given to you. In our next class, we are going to be talking about the organization of life. The what? Organization of life. How many stages of organization of life? How many levels of organization of life do we have? The 4 of them, which include the cell, the tissue, the organ, and the system level. We're going to talk about that in our next class. You won't want to miss out in that. So if you are yet to subscribe to this channel, right away as I'm talking about it, please click on the subscription button. After you subscribe, don't stop there. For further benefit, turn on the notification bell. This is the reason. If you click on the notification bell, a menu will pop up. Select all. By default, YouTube will tick personalized. You change it to all. These things are free of charge. Subscription is free of charge. Turning on your notification bell is free of charge. The reason why you do that is just for you to receive all notifications from this channel as academic contents are being uploaded. So whenever I upload any content, any lesson, or I come on live, you will be the first person to be notified so that you can connect to the class. That is the reason why you have to subscribe, you have to turn on the notification bell and select all. If you don't do that, you'll be missing out in classes. And of course, you know what we do on GMAETS 41, step by step, we take these topics in connected form. We organize the topics in a way that is best for you to learn and understand it. Because if you don't follow your studies in a correct order, if you approach your studies in a scattered way, that is how the information will be scattered in your brain. And at the end of everything, you will end up not understanding the topic and all subjects the way you expect to understand it. So to follow up with our classes, make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell. I'll be seeing you in our next biology class where we treat the organization of life or of living things.